Good afternoon. This is the Committee on Administration. We are here in room 54 of the government building. It is uh, our monthly meeting. We did not have a meeting last month, and we moved this meeting ahead a week to accommodate me. I'm going to be gone. Our first order of business is call the roll. Dan, if you would do that, please.
All right, we have Supervisor Story, Supervisor Bashan, Supervisor Vogel, Supervisor Bauer,
Here.
and Chair Headland.
Here. Thank
All
you
right,
much.
Everyone is here.
All are present. We have a quorum. Public comments. Are there anyone here from the public who wishes to speak? None? Okay. Did our clerk receive any communication? Oh, okay, thank you. Next is approval of our meeting minutes. Our last meeting took place April 24th. Entertain a motion to approve.
A motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Okay. And okay, Supervisor Bashan, Supervisor Story seconds. Any corrections or changes? Hearing none, all in favor, aye? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes. Thank you much. Staff reports, again in your packet, are reports from admin, human resources, criminal justice collaboration, IT, corp counsel, and county clerk. We do not have a treasurer's report in the packet. Any questions any of the supervisors that have for any of those reports? Right, hearing none, we'll move on. Item 6 on our agenda today is consideration of actions to be taken by the committee. A is review the vouchers. We have 2 vouchers starting in 4/1 going through 5/31. Anyone care to make a motion for the vouchers? Or do we need any information about them?
I got a couple questions on a couple.
Questions first? All right.
Or you gotta approve it first. I don't know.
Should move first.
Oh, I'll make a
Yeah.
motion.
Okay. And second, all right, Bauer and Bashan, motion and second. All right, Mr. Bauer.
Okay, it says item on page 36, elder flag, I get down to my page number here.
36, okay.
Which section, Mr. Bauer?
The veterans service.
Okay,
Veteran services, I'm not seeing it. Oh, yeah, yes, sir. Go ahead.
36, let me get there yet. The flag, I mean, it's an elder flag manufacturing, it's $6,623. It just says other expenses. Does somebody get an itemized, does somebody see an itemized list, or is it just the numbers he throws out there as
No, that was, usually typically he replenishes, so he buys flags in bulks. So I'm assuming part of it would be for some of the holidays that might be coming up. And a lot of them gets for distribution. So that's really what I believe that is a bulk purchase. And it could have been a miscoding because it's typically he coats them under operating supplies. It could have been an other expense. Like I said, this is likely budgeted under their operating, but not other expense.
you think that he would have yeah, maybe it was.
And I can
wrong.
quickly.
Not that, I mean, I just thought that other expenses means that should have been other items in there, could have been flags, you could have just said flags, but you know.
Yep. So as I'm jotting down these notes, and as we continue with this, perhaps there'll be some time and I can come back and give you an update.
Okay.
So for now, I'm just going to make a note to come back.
okay.
Okay. I got another one here on the next page on surveyors, it's 2,100. What's the cost? I mean, AT&T, I mean, for 75 cents, is it worth billing or does it cost more to pay them than it does to collect the money?
Looks like Dan is ready to answer that one.
You know, it doesn't make sense.
It's a reallocation, so we get a lump sum bill
No.
and it just,
Not that one.
that one, okay, never mind then. Fine.
So, yeah, so likely what that, I'm pretty sure, the surveyor's office has, AT&T flip phones that they get at a very small price and they pay when they use them. So you're seeing a 2-minute call. And so that's kind of their charge. And so they essentially don't need them most of the time. It's kind of for emergency or other type situations like that. So it's a pretty low cost option as opposed to buying a phone that never gets used. We get these simple phones and you pay per call. It's more per minute than you would like to necessarily pay, but if you're only making 75 cents worth of calls a month, it's the kind of the right choice.
What does it cost to pay them 75 cents? I mean, to pay them, does it cost more for us to do it that way? You know what I'm saying?
So if
Just
they
run
would
down
have,
the billing and the manpower to do all this stuff.
so these types of bills that's where, as Beata was saying, like that's one bill that the whole county gets and it gets
Oh, it just gets-
distributed. So yeah, it's not too much of an additional cost. If they were to have a phone, they'd be paying about $40 a month for that phone. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I just wondered about 75 cents.
yep.
Good question.
One more I have on, environmental services, Justin Jensen. That's next page on 38,
Mm-hmm.
2100, what was it, $15,000? I guess who's Justin Jensen's button.
Hmm. I would have to get back to you on that.
It's a ground, I know it's grounds improvement or something.
Environmental services, it's paid by a grant,
Okay,
but I will have to pull out an invoice and actually tell you what it's for.
okay,
So I'll come back to that one.
thank you.
Mhm.
That's all I had.
And I know Beata will get that, but I do know that in a lot of cases, what that is that's a grant, so it's pass-through money. So they received a grant and then they pay the person as some sort of a match to do some sort of a repair or something like that. So I'm not going to say that's exactly what it is, but that's kind of the norm of that environmental services area is they receive $15,000 and then they give it to the farmer to pay for whatever it is that they had to do.
Okay, Supervisor Bashan.
So on page 41,
Okay, 41, so,
under the plant ops admin, I know we have 2 months of invoices and there's 2 capital leases that are the same amount, but then there's a third one that's slightly different. Are they different things or they just happen to end up with 3 on here?
and then, so that's for the judicial center?
Oh, plant ops, so 5101.
Oh, yes, I see it.
Yep.
So because, and again, I would have to look to see, but I think there's 2 months worth and, I really don't
And another.
have,
Yeah.
I would have to look at those. Those are the, 3,500, 3,500 and 3,500?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
The asset leases.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think your specific question, so that is our fleet vehicles to enterprise rent-a-car. But I think as I heard that, the specific question is related to why the one is 3588 as opposed to 3535.
And why there's 3 if it's 2 months of invoices.
Yeah.
So,
Right. Yep, okay. Good question. Any other ones? I'll go.
Second and everything. Favor of approval. Aye. Aye. Very much. Approval of the credit card in the credit
That's me.
service, you have information in your packet. Speak to that. Motion to approve. Or do you want to wait? All right, go ahead.
Okay, so this is something new, and this policy covers how we at the county handle consumers' credit cards. So this is not us using a card. This is the other way around. So anytime we take on that responsibility of taking consumers' credit cards, we have to follow guidelines. Some of those guidelines is, of course, what is the best practice to make sure that we are responsible on how we secure consumers' personal confidential information, such as their credit card information, to protect, again, our reputation as a county. And then there's the PCI DSS. And then so that is a payment card industry data security standard. So they are very strict and they're very specific. So this policy covers what employees need to do for those that are handling those credit card machines. We call them, you might hear them as terminals. So we have a third party, VPS, and they're the ones that kind of provide that service. So for that service, there's a convenience fee. So we just want to make sure that it's addressed in the policy on how we're going to communicate that to our consumers, to be transparent, also to protect their data, to make sure that we're not at a risk of compromising the data. So that is like their credit card number, the whole digits, security codes, or expiration dates, or anything that might be subject to identity theft or theft of their credit card information. I've became a victim many, many times of this when my card got compromised. And then this is for to put the best practice in place to make sure that we are responsible. So we do offer consumers to come in and pay on site where we actually have terminals. And we also provide services to our consumers that they can pay online. And there's also service that can pay e-check if they don't have a major credit card, or they can also pay check, credit card, and on phone. So if they don't want to use the internet, there's a 1-800 number that they would call. So it's not us who's actually writing down that information. So that policy came into place because it has covered that risk. We also renewed a contract with our VPS provider. So this again came in an excellent opportunity to make sure that we have best practice into place. And the other one is the ACH, and ACH is when we wire to somebody. So we want to make sure that that information is also protected and how we control that. So if a vendor calls, or let's, I'm sorry, it's, if they tell us, hey, we want to pay you, Dunn County, via electronic wire, we also have banking information that needs to be provided to that entity. So that's the information we shouldn't be advertising publicly, which kind of warrants that security measures around who has access to that information and where does it need to come from. So this spells that this is a role of the treasurer. Here's their responsibility, what is finance responsibility, and what are those that are actually handling the cash in those methods of online or the terminal. Okay, I think I'm done.
Any questions for Beata? All right.
Question?
Thanks. I was curious, this almost makes it sound like this can each department choose what kind of terminal they want, or is there a standard terminal?
So our preference, and again, best practice, is that these terminals are known and known to finance and IT for many reasons. One, for the security. Some of these terminals require internet connection and how the data goes from when we scan the card to our bank. So it needs to be through a secure channels. Now, if we go and we open the gates to departments to say, well, you can go and contract with whoever you want, then we're kind of letting go of some of those controls that need to be set in place. Then we would need to control 4 or 5 different systems, which they all have their own they might have their own convenience fee structure. They might have their own fees that are associated that would be on us. So then that would be, is it doable? Sure. But what would be the best and more streamlined is to centralize it using one where we can take advantage of some of those costs that might be passing on. Because consumers have the ability to pay using their credit card, but there is a convenience fee. So that convenience fee can vary. So we're able to negotiate some of those fees.
So the county has basically one processor.
Yeah.
And one type of terminal they would
Yeah,
like
we-
people to use.
Yeah, we try to limit them because there's a lot of security measures that need to take place. We're responsible for part of that data and then can kind of speak from that IT side. But again, for consistency reasons so that one client doesn't go to that department and pays and comes up with different fees and says, well, why do they charge and what they do not charge? But that's not really the big part of that. It's those security measures that we need to control on our side.
And
I think the question you're asking about is the endpoint technology. And I think the answer you're supplying is the endpoint technology has to comply to the standards that this provider uses. So the specific piece of hardware at the end matters a lot less than the provider and the fee structure. And as long as the endpoint technology complies with that, it should be okay.
Right.
That's, I'm just listening to the two of you, and I think that might be the piece that was being missed.
Yes, absolutely. Because we have other departments that have somebody else other than what I'm calling here, this VPS third party.
there are other.
I believe the Register of Deeds, is it?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Clerk of courts.
Clerk of Courts, sorry. Because it feeds into a specific system through another gateway.
Okay. And just one other thing is, it seemed like there were some things that repeated
Mhm.
about not having possession of a payer's payment card, like there was prohibited, and then in the section right before it said the same thing, and I didn't know if,
So which
Good.
section specifically?
so in the PCI DSS requirements number
So O,
5. Yep.
section 05. So employees shall not handle or be in a possession of the payer's payment card. That means we can't take it and possess it.
Right, and so P under
P,
has the same,
so employees processing cards. So that means is the best practice is that when there's time to pay, we should give them the terminal where they have control over the card. We should not be taking their card, walking over to a different room, pay it and bring it back. And the other one is saying we should not just have it in a drawer, take it from them and keep them because they might say, well, this is a reoccurring. Why don't you just keep my card and just charge it?
okay,
Does that? Okay.
thanks.
No, they get really picky about those rules.
To expand on that a little bit, so if we're not to handle the payer's card with all of our offices that have windows, is
Mhm.
that going to be accessible to give them the terminal and still have control over it so that they can't grab and go? Because we also need to have these locked up and secured. So
Right, so.
is it logistically going to be a hassle?
So, I mean, if you go see them, you know, any of them that have the window, we have a little machine that'll slide through the gap for people to do that. Could a person take them and run with them? Yeah. I mean, but you also see these same things implemented if you go to any store. You do your own card work, right? And that is because that is the rule that that the payment card industry has put together. And so that's something as you talk about PCI DSS, as explain that it isn't a law. It's almost worse. Uh, so it's the payment card industry. So it's Visa and MasterCard saying that this is the way you're going to do it, or we're going to charge you more to do it. So they have a lot of teeth behind these rules and how they implement them.
Okay, so, but comparing it to a store, then they keep their terminals out at the registers. But we're telling staff, you have to then lock it up every time it's not in use.
So we asking them to secure. So secure location could be just having that window that separates so that outside person cannot come in and start manipulating a machine by adding some additional scanners to steal consumers' credit card information. It happened at the gas station quite a bit. So secure location, and if they can lock it, that's great. Locked could really, as I did the training, defining secure location and locked, it's a suite that has locked door, no general public can get in. Glass separates from, and they can slide it in to make the transaction. But as they go away, it's not, it's out of general public's reach as much as we possibly can.
Okay, because we also reference limiting access to authorized staff.
Yeah,
So will staff and departments generally all be authorized or?
yes, they would
Okay.
require to have training because then they will need to follow those guidelines that are given to us. If you're going to use this technology, we have to follow. So I've done the training, so I have a roster of who those are. And then there's a training information that I have for them to make sure that they understand how to handle those credit cards and those terminals. So that's just saying is they need to complete training and we're going to identify them as the qualified person. So in a lot of departments, if they're at the front desk and they're handling consumer facing, then they will be the ones trained and they'll have access.
Any more questions? All right. Um, we need a formal motion, and this is a policy, it's not a referendum or resolution, but is a policy that we are going to set forth, and they would like the committee to approve it. So I need a motion. Thank you. Supervisor Story? Need a second? Supervisor Vogel? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you all. All right. Provide feedback on the 2026 wage proposal and discussion feedback on that. And so Jenna, do you want to get things rolling?
Yes, I will. Thank you. Well, that's really small. Okay, so thank you for your time today. I do have quite a bit of information coming, and so I tried to print as many materials as I thought would be helpful for you to be able to reference even beyond today. And we will start by this green graphic one-page sheet. This is what has both been provided to employees, emailed out. We're also having department meetings that we're handing this out. It's really meant to be kind of like a one-page explanation of what we're doing and why. I won't be reading off of this. This is just for your reference. The next sheet of paper that we have, I will reference during the presentation. So if you could keep that one handy, that would be wonderful. It is the performance check-in guide for managers. Okay, so I'm first going to cover the changes that we have made to the performance management process here at Dunn County as it relates to what was previously considered an employee evaluation. And so in identifying what we thought would be productive changes to our performance management process here at the county, we had a few goals in mind while we considered that. The first being understanding the importance of regular and ongoing feedback that celebrates wins and also identifies areas of growth. The thinking behind this is having a conversation once a year about performance isn't the most effective approach. And so we are valuing ongoing and regular feedback. And we'll talk a little bit more about how our process gets closer to that need. Next, because we work in county government and we have 20-ish, 24 different departments that do very different things, it can be really challenging to identify a system that works for every department. And so we found that a simple system that's able to fit and be customized by each department while also balancing accountability and connection, while also having a mechanism for us to be able to report on that information is where we wanted to land. And then lastly, we referenced a few statements from our employee satisfaction survey that just closed for the second year with the comments of, I have regular check-ins with my manager holds employees accountable, and my annual performance evaluations help me identify areas for improvement and growth. Those three statements had a significant enough percentage of disagreement by the respondents to the survey. And so we've identified those as areas to really tune into and work on improving. Not moving. There we go. Okay, so what does this process look like? You, in addition to all employees at the county, would have received an email with a video that gives even more details about what this will look like. But we're gonna just try and brush on the main pieces of this. And so, like I said, in the interest of wanting more ongoing and regular feedback, we've moved from the traditional annual performance evaluation model to more of a quarterly performance check-in approach. And so what this is really saying we want managers to talk to their employees at least quarterly about their performance. And so the process for that, manager prepares for the conversation. We've also poured into manager and leadership training and how to have those conversations, and we'll continue to support managers throughout that. They'll have their meeting, and then the manager will complete a really simple form that includes a performance rating and a space for a narrative to provide the details about what was discussed in that conversation, both from the employee and the manager. There's also an area to attach supporting documentation if they wish. Once that's completed, the employee has access to be able to see it, the manager's manager, HR, and we do plan to conduct audits so that we're able to identify any areas of gaps or where we need to tune in on more training and things like that. So the 3 performance ratings that are available within this process include exceeds expectations, meets expectations, and needs improvement. And I do have on that performance checking guide, they are defined there. I know this is a bit small, but in a nutshell, exceeding expectations would be an employee that is having exceptional contributions in most areas of their job. They demonstrate initiative, innovation, and they have an impact that goes beyond the typical expectations of the role. We wouldn't expect the majority of our employees to be in this. This is meant to be in recognition of the high performers of the organization. Meets expectations would define like where we would like to see employees be. They're consistently meeting all aspects of the role. They are dependable, competent, and they contribute effectively. There may be some areas where they can grow, right? We can all grow. There's not a ceiling there. But there are no areas that require improvement. The last category is needs improvement. And the key word here is needs. The distinction is we're not saying that nobody can always have a room to improve, but that their performance must improve. Otherwise, there will be either disciplinary action or a performance improvement plan in place. If you flip to the back side of that, there is a rubric that we have put together that includes the 5 core values that the county established. And so what we wanted to outline here is that exceeding expectations doesn't always have to mean it's quantitative, right? It can also be qualitative. It can be how you show up to work. And so we've defined here what that could look like. And again, part of the challenge in finding consistencies with so many different types of roles in the county, we look at these and we think this can apply to any position in the county, whether they're at the bottom of the wage scale or the top. And so we thought that this is a helpful balance to provide some consistency. This isn't intended to be the only thing that employees, that managers are thinking about when they're deciding on a rating, but it's intended to provide some consistency and also to set the bar for how we expect people to act at work and to work together and collaborate. Any questions on those? So employees throughout this process, they don't have to fill out a form, but what we need from them and what we've communicated in this is that we need them to understand what is expected of them at work and need them to be asking questions if they need clarity around that. Actively engaging in the conversations, those performance check-ins that they have with their manager, really owning their own goals and development, and also providing their manager with feedback and insights. We really would like to continue building the culture of feedback being a gift and not necessarily meant to be a dig on somebody, but that we're giving this feedback to help you, right? The first round of quarterly check-ins will begin this year, July 1. So we have provided training to about 90% of the management staff around this process and their role in it, and provided tools and resources for them to approach these. And we are also, this is really the same presentation that we're giving to each department. We've already had 3, and we'll have more throughout the next few weeks. I thought it was important to give you the background on what the performance management system looks like, because we are proposing for that to tie into what employee increases may look like for 2026. We are also proposing with this to remove what's now the 11-step system, right? So we have 25 pay grades, A through W, Y, whatever 25 is. And that's where positions are placed, right? Like a operator is placed at grade H, right? On grade H, there are 11 steps. So that's an incremental jump that employees are getting when you approve step increases with the budget. They're going up by 2.75%. So instead of having those rigid incremental steps, we would move more to we'd still have pay grades, but it would just be a minimum through a maximum range. We can talk more about what that might look like too. And then also tying the rating from the October performance check-in. So that's the check-in that happens between October 1st and November 15th. Will have an overall rating, and that will determine what the percentage increase looks like for that employee for 2026. The reason why we would choose the October rating is because by then the employee has had time throughout other check-ins. Like this year, it would be July. They would have a conversation with their manager, they would receive a rating, and they would know where they stand. And they would be able to have a conversation about what they can improve upon or what's going well so that they know what to expect and to clarify what those expectations are with their manager. So what this is proposed as is if an employee is rated as needing improvement on that October check-in, that means performance must improve in order for things to continue or to avoid disciplinary action and things like that. We are proposing that they would not receive an increase for 2026. For meeting expectations, employees would receive a 2.5% increase. And for exceeding expectations, employees would receive a 3% increase. There's been a lot of questions about what if I'm at the top of the pay scale, and we do have about 17% of our workforce that is, and as long as they meet expectations, they would stay at that top rate. And so they would get lifted with any sort of market adjustment that's made to that pay range. And this is really the important part. This is why we're going out to each department to try and explain why we're doing this, right? Because we understand it is a really big change. And this is the piece that we would like you all to consider and help us in problem solving too. So like I had said earlier, the step system is very rigid and is fixed at 2.75% no matter what. And that really restricts how we can identify wage increases, right? Because it's like it has to be 2.75% if we're going to approve step increases. And then that really creates a challenge with deciding what can be provided as far as a cost of living adjustment or a market adjustment to the overall wage scale. The most typical increase each year that the county has approved is 2% increase to the wage scale plus a 2.75% increase. And that is about a 4.75% increase each year for employees that are not already at the top step. As you can imagine, the cost of this is what we feel is not fiscally sustainable. When we look at what that could look like over the next 5 years, it's at least an additional $2 million that the county would need to find in funding each year to like make that happen. Really status quo, would look like that. And then also, again, feedback from our employee satisfaction survey, 25%, even with the step system, have dissatisfaction with compensation. And when we dug into this and had conversations about employees from all different departments, the most common complaint that we heard in that is more about, I'm doing as much as I can at work and doing the best job I can, and I see my peer who's barely showing up and they're getting the same increase as me. What's motivating me to continue to give it my all? And then also the need for meaningful and effective performance management and overall accountability at the county is a concern. So to dig into the costing a little bit more, if we were to continue status quo for the next 5 years, let's say 2% market adjustment to the grid plus steps. If everything remained exactly the same for the next 5 years, the cost of that would be $12.8 million that the county would need to find in those next 5 years. This new structure would be about 7.4 million over the next 5 years. And so that's kind of splitting the difference between some employees getting a 2.5% increase and some getting a 3% increase, right? So that's about $5.4 million that would not need to be found over the next 5 years. And this is new information for employees, not for you, but we know that any increased expenditure is probably going to have to be found somewhere else in either operating or staffing. And so continuing on the same path is a concern for what that could look like in next year or the following years, as far as needing to be able to find how those increases will be funded. So what we are hoping with this is to have a more sustainable approach to providing increases while also shifting from automatically rewarding, years of service to more of like the contributions that employees are actually bringing to work. With this magnitude of a change, we have put together a communication plan and are kind of partway through that. Right now, we are doing those department meetings with each department. I'm not gonna lie, shaking in my boots a little bit this morning when we were standing up in front of 100 human services employees, but those meetings have really surprised me as far as the understanding that we've been receiving. And I think it's really helped to try and explain the why. You might ask, why are we proposing this to employees when it's proposed and it could change? But we really wanted to prioritize transparency as much as possible. There are employees that watch these meetings and we didn't want them to find out from a YouTube video. So they are aware that this is going through an approval process, and we intend to give as many email updates as possible as it evolves. Employees and you as well are probably thinking, okay, it's a little complicated. So we would plan to provide individual compensation statements. They're going to know exactly what they're making in 2025 and what their increase will be for 2026, so that there's clarity there. And then early next year, January and February, we will host like town hall sessions, listening sessions to get feedback from employees, understand what's going well, what's not, and then maybe what to consider heading into the budget process for 2027. And then just in general, ongoing support. We've really prioritized performance management as an HR team. I would say even above that with our county management. And we'll continue to keep that at the forefront as we move through these changes. With that, I would welcome any questions or feedback or guidance moving forward. I also want to say the next portion of this does relate in some ways as far as the human resources code.
Question, Michelle?
I will say I have some concerns, and I've already heard from some county employees' concerns. So even though you've just started talking about it, they've already expressed to me their issues. I don't know that I'm on board with moving the step system, but I do appreciate the need to have some performance-based impact. So how you have the, not meeting expectations, not getting a raise, if it could be something incorporated into the steps where if they don't get the step increase if they're not meeting. Or if they're exceeding, maybe they get a bonus on top of their step increase. Because what I have heard is, so I don't see it in here, but is there an amount that you expect the whole scale will go up each year? So if somebody is at the bottom of the scale, they're not meeting, they can't fall off the bottom of the scale, can they?
So we have identified that as like a potential, right? I can
Mhm.
tell you there are 11 employees roughly in the county that are actually at step one.
Right.
And so is it possible that one of them might be rating needing improvement and fall below? Yes. Also, they are likely to be in their introductory period. And if there are enough concerns within that, that's sort of kind of what that introductory period is for. And there may be other avenues at that point, but we are aware of that, but it would be a really, really small percentage if it would apply.
Okay, because I saw something that referenced maybe a 2% grid adjustment.
Yes.
So if we're saying a 2.5% increase, the staff's only going up 0.5% more than the grid. So
Yes.
somebody that's, 5 years down the line, bring a new hire in, start them a little above the bottom of the grid, the new employee may be making more than the existing staff. So not having the steps, while it does give more leeway for the managers to to bring staff in, it seems like it may also open up the staff that have been here and exceeding or meeting or exceeding, not being able to keep up with new hires.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, you're correct. Like that's what would happen. And I think one of the things that I don't think you said it, but it's been, yes, this is my third time hearing this today. Likely, just from a financial reality standpoint, we would not be making a recommendation to provide steps this year.
Okay.
So that's a part of that if we're looking at a 2% cost of living, that grid adjustment, that 0.5% is something we feel is fiscally something we can do, but we can't do 2.75.
Plus.
That's the rigidness of the step system is we can do a cost of living. And if we want to go above a cost of living, the only option is 2.75%. So that's where this model gives a flexibility and yes, a little bit more. And it isn't intended to be a forever 0.5%. That's the 2026 proposal.
And then this does tie to the performance. I have heard that the manager completion of performance reviews is very low now.
Mm-hmm.
So going to quarterly seems like adding more on that is already not getting done.
Yeah, and I can understand that perspective. If you watch the full, 10-minute video, you'll see the form is literally a checkbox and a narrative. A lot of departments are already having regular check-ins with their employees.
Okay.
So this is not intended to add. And if departments aren't having at least quarterly check-ins with their employees, we're really saying, well, it's kind of an expectation that you do because we know that it is considered to be best practice to have some level of a regular check-in. And so there is accountability here on the level of the managers, absolutely. We've, identified that completion rate as a major issue and looking to absolutely approach this with accountability
So
moving
if they
forward.
potentially are not completing them, they might not be eligible for a raise.
I would say that's not meeting expectations.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yes.
If that were to happen, like if a whole department didn't have check-ins completed, we would obviously be having a conversation about that so that employees aren't harmed in that. But this is really this is setting the bar for our management staff.
And I would add one thing with the 2.75 really rigid step structure. Given the sort of overall makeup and concerns of the board and the trends on that over the last few years, it is entirely easier to expect the board, as it is currently constructed, to be supportive of a higher total number if they aren't tied to that 2.75%. So you might be able to, if you don't have the steps, you might actually be able to get a better compensation plan for employees than you would if you do, because the board may well not be up for approving that larger number. And that's one of the conversations that I've been having with folks, and that's part of what's informing this.
And just my other recommendation would be you have it at 2.5 and 3, and maybe making it 2.5, 3.5, because 0.5% is not a huge difference between meets and exceeds.
So I appreciate that. And honestly, any level of increase that we'd love to give more, right? There is some intentionality in there not being a huge difference in this first year because we recognize that ratings will not be perfect and we don't want that to be a huge detriment to employees, right? It's a little bit of a baseline year to see kind of how many are rated a certain way so that we know what to expect moving forward.
So the proposal would be to every year set new numbers.
To recommend new numbers based on fiscal resources at that point, yes. Mhm.
So I was in a system like this, and HR at one point said people were rated too high, like too many people did exceeds expectations. So because they didn't want to hurt their employees or anything. So did you see that happening?
I will say that we do plan to audit and take a look at ratings and ask questions and dig into that. That's part of wanting to hold managers accountable to like having those tough conversations and really helping them grow through that. Because I get it's uncomfy. We've done a lot of training about uncomfortable conversations the last few years. And so I don't think they're going in blind. But right now it's like, you go to the training and it's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then when it comes down to it, it's not being put into practice.
So I'd bring you back to Michelle's previous question. That's why it's a 0.5%. Is yes, if managers were to go in and just say, not want to kind of have that conversation and just choose exceeds, it becomes much more costly at 3.5 than it does at 3. So we wanted to be able to control that cost as we learned how that is and get that baseline, and then we can come back and work with managers, and maybe it's not all of them, maybe it's some of them, in order to work through that process.
Supervisor Story.
I also have concerns, but I guess one of the things that I thought about in reading through it is the power of the managers. What happens when you've got that employee that feels like they're not being treated fairly or they're not understood, and that manager is the one that is going to be responsible for whether or not something happens? What is the process for disputes?
Yeah, so I mean, I would argue that is the case now. Managers are responsible for, making employment decisions about the employees that they manage. But as there is now and will continue to be, there's always an avenue for employees to come talk to HR, and we will look into it and try and identify a solution moving forward.
Is that written somewhere as far as if there's a dispute, that there is a process they should go through to maybe have it heard by someone else to see if it can be overturned or changed?
So any discriminatory or harassment related concerns on that front, there is a policy on that and a process on that. We we do want to be careful about providing like a specific process for this, because part of this is wanting employees to be able to talk through that directly with their manager. We want to be careful about not steering them straight to HR before they're able to try and say their piece and be heard at that level. But always we are available to support employees through challenges that they're having with their managers.
Well, if they've had a challenge with their manager and they know, because it's written somewhere, that the next step for them to take is to come to you, what happens if they feel like they're still not being heard correctly? Then are they supposed to come to Dan or come to us, or where should they go? What is the process if there's a concern? So I guess we've encountered that situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, obviously an employee could go to human resources and express their concern. I think that what we ultimately get back to is a question of, is the manager, so if the manager was truly showing favoritism or treating someone unfairly, that would be that manager not doing their job, right? Or the manager is correct and that employee is not doing their job. So we really run into a he said, she said type situation there, whereas somebody's got to be able to figure out where that problem is. So if a manager has 7 employees and one employee says this person is treating me improperly, unfairly, we can go have those conversations. We can determine what is ultimately happening. But the reality is, to be an effective team, that group has to be able to work together. And I think that's something where if it does come up to me or if it goes to Jenna, we can't say, you need to do it this way, you need to do it this way. That team has to be able to work together, and to force them to work when they're not getting along is going to be ineffective.
And I will just leap in very briefly on the, go to Dan, go to us. There are an incredibly small number of situations in which it would be appropriate for us as policy and oversight to be having those operational conversations with employees. I mean, I can imagine some that might exist, but in general, that's absolutely within the managerial side of the things rather than policy and oversight, which is our job. I mean, there are very few cases where it might fall under oversight, but just in general, that is absolutely not our job.
Well, my thought is that they should know what the steps are for them to do in the event that this happens, and not for them to guess, so that they don't automatically come to a board member or to a manager, that they know where they should go with that. And because that has happened recently. And with that situation, or with a situation like that, I mean, we may hear what their concerns are, but it's, have they done everything they needed to do before they came to us? And again, what do we do, obviously, also in the event that that happens? So scenario, let's say there's a scenario where an employee has been with the county for a number of years, and there is somebody that's leaving, and so there's a job that is open, and it's a higher position than the position that they have now. And they apply for that position. and they don't get the position, but maybe somebody from outside gets the position, but then that position, they're not very good and they leave, and then it opens up again. And they again apply for that position, or they feel like maybe they shouldn't apply for that position because they were treated unfairly before. In other words, there's scenarios that I think that occur that give me concern as to whether or not the employee or me, if it happens to me, what am I going to do under those circumstances if I feel that I have been treated unfairly and the system is such that it's not going to recognize what's going on with me, and I'm doing above and beyond, and I just don't feel appreciated, and so my morale is down, and so now I'm going to maybe be judged based upon that, and et cetera. That's one area of concern that I have. Second area of concern is health insurance. Does this mean that if all of a sudden health insurance premiums have to change, that the step system not being in effect would mean that that would be taken into consideration so that there is never a situation where a person is going to end up getting a raise, but then having their health system premiums be such that it's going to just wipe it away and there's no real adjustment at all. So that would be my other concern. And is that a reason maybe not to have a step system, or have you had thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, we have heard concerns lifted up now about that and had looked into them, and we made sure that the increase to premiums on the more expensive plan did not offset any wage increases. That has not happened. And we would do everything possible to make sure that it doesn't. So, what that looks like is the lowest rate of pay, comparing that increase to the increase in the premium and making sure that that is not significantly impacted. So, we will consider that in how the premium rates are recommended for health insurance in a few months. We don't have enough data right now to make that recommendation.
And in our meetings with departments, we've had that exact question and told staff that it will not exceed the 2.5%. That, and if there are premium increases, it will not increase or be greater than that 2.5%.
And if they were to come to you and show that that is the case for them, then would they be adjusted somehow to where that doesn't happen if you do find that that did happen?
But it's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
If premiums are the only reason why maybe their take-home pay is lower, we will do whatever possible to make sure that doesn't happen. But there are also other factors that play into a change in take-home pay from year to year, tax changes and things like that. So I think it can sometimes be more than one factor playing into that. So we would sit down with them and help them understand what we're able to do. And
Can you flip, I guess maybe 2 slides forward? Oh, maybe it's backwards. So Jenna does have a plan to provide a total, there it is. The individual compensation statements. So what that will do is kind of provide a year to year, what it looked like last year, what it looked like this year for every employee. So they'll be able to kind of look at those things side by side to be able to understand that. So that is a new thing that we're looking to add with this change to help employees truly understand what that change is between last year's payments and this year's.
And in determining your number of the raise increase, you're taking into consideration each year, rate of inflation, cost of living, those kinds of things. And that's another reason maybe not to have a step system, because it's always subject to other factors that are out there.
yeah. Well, we know market is rapidly changing and somewhat volatile. And so we're looking to have some flexibility in how we can approach wage increases. Like Dan said, it would be challenging to recommend a step increase for next year, given the anticipated cost. And what that would look like then is just a cost of living increase of 2% likely. And so we're really trying to split the difference here. Still give them some means of an increase, and motivate performance in the process.
What about if the board found that the budgets were going to be really, 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 really tight? Would there ever be consideration toward a freeze? And if there was a freeze, how would that impact your employee? Would they just go someplace else because it's better in other counties, or what would happen there?
I'm gonna leap in on that one because I think that one is mostly a board policy question. And while I personally would be very much against a freeze, the board is absolutely capable of imposing that. And there is nothing staff and the management side can do about that because that's fundamentally a board question.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Sheila. Anyone else?
Okay.
Move on. Thank you.
Um, I will say too, we absolutely welcome alternatives. I hear the concerns and I share in them. And so we are looking to balance all of the challenges that are happening at one time. Okay, so I'm gonna,
Michelle, just one more recommendation I had thought of that I forgot. For the staff that are at the top of the scale, if they are recommended to have a 3% increase, but they can't go up that high, just a potential so they're feeling like they're not losing out is taking the extra amount above as a one-time bonus. Because in future years, they still get the money, but it's the percentage isn't growing on that. So just as an option, so they don't feel like they're, well, why should I perform if I can't get the raise?
I'll say a lot of the comments that we're hearing in the department meetings are just that. So I appreciate that idea. Okay. Are we ready to talk about the personnel code?
Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so first I want to kind of describe what I have included as far as printed materials for you in those packets. The first version that you see, Chapter 3 personnel, that is the existing Chapter 3 personnel code. The next, Chapter 3 human resources, is the proposed. The changes, and we'll go through them as we progress through these slides, and I tried to outline them as best as I could in the report, were substantial enough that trying to redline it was really difficult to track. So I totally recognize the side-by-side comparison being difficult. I will try and break down the changes as much as possible. And then my intent in giving you these printed copies was so you could take them with you and try and digest them as much as you can. Okay, so for today's discussion, hoping to help explain what the current challenges are with the current Chapter 3 personnel code, our goals in the proposed draft, and we will go through those most fundamental changes, the most substantial changes that we're proposing, and they relate to staffing and compensation, relate to what we just talked about as far as wages. And then again, obtain your feedback and guidance and questions. And so we are not asking you to take action today. We're simply providing kind of what we have in mind and want to give an opportunity to fine tune that based on your direction. I won't go through these, but I wanted you to know that I defined some key terms on the slide that I printed. That's at the very back of your packet. And we will reference those as we discuss. So the current challenges with the personnel code as it is now is relating to, and I'll direct you to section. So it's 3.11, classification plan. What this section requires is a significant amount of steps and processes in order to create a new job title. So it references the inventory of job classifications, and I actually have one on the agenda. It's really good timing to kind of show an example of why this can be a hang up for us and being able to adapt. So the several steps really limits our ability to respond to operational needs and requires at least standing committee meeting, committee on administration, and then board review. And so it takes 3 or more months for that process to work itself out if we have a new type of job title or new type of role that we're trying to create. There is no formal requirement for adjusting or tracking or increasing or decreasing department FTEs. FTEs, I do have defined here on this little handy dandy glossary. That is the standard unit of measuring the equivalent of a full-time position at 1.0 versus a part-time. If it's half-time, it's a 0.5. Those types of things. So that's really how we can measure staffing levels at the county. So currently there's no reference to that in the personnel code. And as we just discussed, the compensation plan is defined very specifically, and that's on page 8 of the current version. You can see in number 5, so that's 3.165. It specifically defines 25 grades, 11 steps. And for reasons that we had just discussed, that's been difficult to manage within fiscal limitations and any rapidly changing market shifts and things like that. And then we are also looking to bring some more definition to authority and roles as it relates to county manager, human resources director. This first version of the personnel code was drafted in 2012 when we didn't have a human resources department or division. So I'm looking to really bring it up to date as well. Why does this matter? So the time-consuming process for creating a new job title may delay needed hires. We've seen where departments are just trying to make workarounds that don't really actually fully meet the needs of the operations at that given time because they don't want to go through this 3+ month process to create the actual job title that makes sense. Position records and budget documents can get out of sync if we're not tracking and closely monitoring FTE levels. And in general, pay practices can quickly become outdated if we have this level of specificity with 25 grades, 11 steps. And so we are looking to propose some language that allows a little bit more flexibility. So now I will shift you to the Human Resources Code, which is the proposed draft. First and foremost, our goals of the proposed changes is to clarify roles and processes. And so you can see in 3.02, that section really is meant to define what the county board is responsible for, what the committee on administration is as it relates to human resources administration, county manager, human resources director, department and division heads, and then managers and supervisors. So we feel that this draft provides some more clarity there. And if at any point you want me to stop talking and pause, just let me know. We also expanded upon the definitions section. The most significant piece there that we're kind of lacking now is really defining the difference between what a regular position is, also known as permanent, right? A regular full-time position or regular part-time position compared to a temporary position. So we have defined that here, as well as what it means to be casual or seasonal. And I do see my indent got funky there, so we will fix that. So another goal with this is really to not change any level of authority that's given by the committee or the county board. So we are preserving that as much as possible. Our goal is to just remove administrative bottlenecks while maintaining that. We're looking to support the fiscal responsibility through better tracking and accountability of the FTE tracking. And so I will have you to go to page 5, position administration, and that really outlines what we would propose as a starting point for how FTEs can be managed and the process if a department would like to increase or decrease or change FTEs or overall authorized staffing levels in general. So as it is now, in the proposed draft, the department head would request to amend the FTE of either a certain position or overall authorized staffing level to human resources. And then human resources would make a recommendation to the county manager. And then the county manager would approve or deny the request. This is only for changes that would not impact budget. Okay. I want to pause here. Yep.
So that is, even though this is written and it seems like it's something, it isn't necessarily new. That's a process that happens somewhat behind the scenes. This is really just kind of formalizing the fact that we are going to recognize these FTEs and track them and how we control those. So it is a practice. It's just not a written one.
So let's say department wanted to add 2 FTEs to their org chart. In conversations, either with human resources, probably with finance too, and then in Dan's process of making that decision, if it were the case that this is going to impact current or future budgets, they would be required to go through the budget amendment process. And so we are looking for there to maintain clarity in that through that process. I want to pause here. This is one of the bigger changes. So any questions, thoughts?
Michelle?
So I agree with the FTE and having clarification on that. But going back to the position description or creating new positions, the proposal in this actually conflicts with chapter 5. So, because in chapter 5 of our ordinances, we say review and determine adequate staffing levels and recommend staffing, position classification changes to committee and administration under the county board or county manager position. So in 5, we're saying the county manager recommends, and in this new proposal, we're saying the county manager approves. Oh, and then in our new rules of the board that we're proposing, Committee on Administration has jurisdiction over personnel matters, which would be, so if we're having the county manager approve it, then is that outside of admin having the jurisdiction? So I get it's a long process, but there's a reason we implemented it. So and maybe that's more strategic planning. So how often do we have a situation where we need a position now?
So, an example of the now is the position that the position title that we are requesting to create for the facilities, parks, and transit director. So, what that requires now is that full, committee on administration. There was discussion with facilities, and then needs to go to the board. And so it's the 3-month process in order to be able to move forward on positions that would be beneficial to combine, or just, it's an example of
But
I want-
adapting
I
to.
wanna-
we have the ability to add interim duties?
Yeah, so I want to just clarify, make sure that we're all using the same terms for everything, because a job title is not a position. A job title is truly to say this position description falls on this grade. That's what that classification system does. That's the current thing that the board, that goes through that full process of the board. We're going to create a title, we're going to call it this, and it's going to fall in this pay grade. The FTE is more of that position, like a person is going to
Mhm.
fill that, or is going
That
to now
body.
have that title.
Mhm.
So that's kind of that differentiation between that. So that's kind of like the slowdown of, hey, we have this, or the inefficiency, we have this title, but it's not really the right title. I added some duties to this person, and now we want to call it a lead. So what we run into is departments, as opposed to maybe creating that title because of how long it's going to take. We give somebody an equity adjustment and we give them the same title and we move them up to step 10. Now they start maxing out, but the reality is they have a different title. We just didn't go through that process because of the inefficiency of being able to do that.
But we could do the equity adjustment while the process is being done to create the job.
So you can, and we do practice that in a lot of times, but that has a great risk of the bait and switch. So sure, I'm going to give you a promotion. I'm going to give you an equity adjustment of 3 steps, and then we're going to go ask the board if they will make this position for you. If they say no, sorry about that, we're going to have to move you back down, right? So has that happened? Not while I've been here, but that's certainly a risk. And as an employee, that's something that we do ask our employees to do a lot, to say, yep, we're going to run this through the board. I think it'll all go fine, but you're just going to have to trust me on this, right? So I think that's part of the concern there in that process, is that employee is placing a large amount of trust on management and the board, and we don't really know how that will go.
It just, to me, feels like we're getting a little closer to the county administrator if we're having county manager making final decisions that have been in the purview of the board before. So it's one thing, but sometimes it's a little step at a time.
If I may, we're just looking to really shift that oversight from a job title that really doesn't mean anything unless we can actually fill it,
Mhm.
to authorized staffing levels. And allowing the county manager to be able to make decisions within the budget that's already approved as it relates to staffing levels, which is actually how it's working now, because there isn't any specific oversight on FTE.
And I'm okay with the staffing levels. It's
Mhm.
just the position descriptions. that, like you mentioned, the one later today, so that's been announced as the person in the position, yet we haven't acted on it. So it was getting a little ahead of us, so it's like taking it out of what we haven't acted on yet, so why has it been announced as it is official?
Part of that is because he was put in that interim role for the time being, and then knowing that it wouldn't be approved until late July, and also wanting to communicate to staff that he's the one managing these two departments now. So it is kind of a balance of
So now interim,
communication and,
yeah,
right, right. So I guess the better way to communicate that would be to say interim, and then the process for creating that position is going through the approval process. So I definitely understand what you're saying.
But it is certainly exactly that same thing of placing a lot of trust in how that is going forward. And I think that's the part when we talk about the efficiencies, that is a hard thing. And I've seen it happen a few times, done it a few times with some employees in the room. So.
that's not limited to just us doing business. That's many places have that trouble.
Well, and I'll note that this wasn't, this particular position wasn't purely like without a lot of board input. The appropriate chairs of those committees were brought in on that discussion before that happened. And with those chairs on board and the reasonable structuring, it is relatively reasonable for us to expect to be able to make that move. So it's one of the sort of the cosmic hard things about government positions is, okay, we need board approval for some things. We need staff approval for other things. We need staff buy-in. The order in which you talk to people and the speed with which that information moves once it has been conveyed to any single person make for a lot of turbulence. Dan and I were talking about this recently, where it's like, okay, the appropriate committees for these things need buy-in, but the staff needs buy-in too. So like with the discussion about the steps, if it had come straight to the board without the employees, that's a huge blindside. If it goes through the entire employee process, you also have to say, but the board can turn around and say, nope, you've done a bunch of work on this, you've done all of this buy-in, and the board can still say no. So it's just that's just one of our inherent problems of communication in this space.
Yeah. And I would say, so take this position, for example, right? So we have a director of transit and we have a facilities director. The ordinance allows the county manager to appoint those positions. But the county manager is not allowed to create one of both of them. The county manager or staff, actually, it's not even governed, could turn both of those two department heads into a half of an FTE and appoint the same person to both of them. And that person has two titles. The right way to do that is to create a title and to have one person do that same thing. And that's the path that we kind of went down, but that requires this to go into the end of July. And that was as we try to put a person in that position. That means we're going to go with essentially a vacant position for 2 months in order to be able to fill that.
But wasn't that set up as a chain of command to keep the employees or from management from hiring people and nobody on the boards even know about it? I mean, they go behind the scenes, like you create two positions and committees and the board probably wouldn't even know about it. Is that,
That is currently, so.
I mean, unless we approve it.
When you say position,
Yeah.
we have titles and kind of like FTE.
Yeah.
So as it is right now, if you were to say, I'll just pick on the neighbors, because it's easy. There's a position called nurse. It was public health or anywhere. There's nothing that is stopping staff from having taking 5 nurses and making them 10. So that's when we talk about managing FTE. There is no board approval on doing any of that or anything. The control there is that there's not enough budget to pay 10 people at nursing. So if 3 nurses were to leave and you say, you know what, I want to make a lead nurse out of those 3, we now have 3 vacancies, right? I want to make a lead nurse and we're going to pay them a little bit more and I'm not going to backfill those 3 positions. We can't do that because we have to get approval in order to create a title called lead nurse.
But in the meantime, that could get an equity adjustment for the excess things while we work through the process to get the title.
Good. Yep.
Well, and to go back to Dan's earlier example with Austin and dropping those to both half, Dan, Chris at the time, could have just done that and not come back to the board and do anything. They,
Right.
This is the reason we're trying to do this and trying to adjust the titles is to make it a clearer process and more directly accountable to the board rather than the other way around.
Mhm.
Right. But I'm just thinking, if we do the interim, yes, there's the potential of bait and switch. Hopefully, we never do that as a county because we have ethics. But that is a process that we have in place to have that equity to allow for us to get through this process.
For what it's worth, a little bit self-serving. I would also say the process as it is now is time consuming for like me and or my staff if I were to delegate it. And I also think that it's not putting attention on what you actually care about, right? Which is the level of staffing. And so, and if there is a concern over the job titles that are used, we can definitely tune in on that. And I would welcome maybe some amendments to what that looks like if there's concern about the job titles themselves.
All right, I'll just go back to the difference in the language of the proposed chapter 3, the existing chapter 5, and how they do conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So that is
Tell me which part of chapter 5.
So chapter 5, it's 5.1.8, personnel administration, the county manager shall, letter F. And in the proposed 3, it is the 3.01.3, letter like D and E or E. So chapter 5, 5.1.8, letter F, and the proposed chapter 3, 3.2.3, letter E. Yeah, one says review and determine, one says review and approve. Or, sorry, review, determine, and recommend versus review and approve.
If I could ask what your preference is moving forward is chapter 5 language versus the chapter 3 proposed.
My approval is the chapter 5.
And by the way, as we are in the process of rules changes and reviews and policy changes, thank you for that very careful eye to detail. I very much appreciate that.
I mean, this could get in the weeds, but if we were to continue on with the consistency of chapter 5 of the county manager recommending, is that defined somewhere? And can we work together to define that? Or would you like a new proposal specifically for that?
I think if we have the county manager recommending, and if the current process is burdensome, if it could be adjusted to still have the recommendation as the final step. I don't know what that looks like. But change is not necessarily a bad thing all the time, but I do like the recommendation still coming to administration.
The Committee on Administration?
Yeah. Sorry, committee, yeah.
Is there an appetite for it to take, or we're talking like job titles?
Right, looking at this position classification is the language in here.
Okay.
It seems to me that a reasonable compromise on this might be that sort of that level, the job title level of change could be delegated with the HR and the county manager's recommendation to admin specifically, rather than the whole board process. Would
Yes.
that meet with the kind of,
That would save a
Because-
month.
It would be
Yeah, that-
fantastic.
that would save like 2 months and
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yes.
yeah. Because, I mean, you really created the circle. I guess my feeling, yes.
Yeah.
That-
And I think that is one of the slowest parts of it, is that typically the committee administration happens either the day after or a week after the
Yes.
board meeting, which puts us at like 2 months in
2 months.
many
Except in
cases.
July, we got lucky because it's
Yeah.
after.
yeah, and I think that one of the things that appeals to me about that, or the earlier proposition, is the Committee on Administration is very much in the business of looking at these details at that level. And the board is really much less in the business of doing that. And I think this would satisfy the oversight piece while making the process more efficient.
Yes.
Lovely, thank you. Anything else as it relates to FTE or job titles before I move to the next heavy hitter, I guess, the big change is compensation. Yep,
Just when your PowerPoint, would you be willing to share?
absolutely.
I would love to have.
Yep.
As I sit down and study it and read it.
Yep.
Thank you.
So we talked a lot about authority. We are not intending to change in authority, and so welcome thoughts on that. Looking to maintain that the Committee on Administration will continue to review and approve all countywide human resources policies. So that is intended to continue. I will say in this draft, there are specifics in the current code that we feel would be a better fit in policy. And that's not saying we don't want any oversight over that, but that we would instead create a new policy to propose to the Committee on Administration. It would have to go to the board as well if it's compensation or benefits related, and that is consistent with what happens now. So there, and I can reference to a few. If we go to hiring and termination, that section in the proposed draft on page 7 is significantly condensed. And that is because we would hope to be able to instead propose policies around that. And the reason is, with the specific language in the current code, we know the process to change ordinance is lengthy, and it would be a more adaptable approach if we were able to recommend any changes to that policy to this committee and not go through the full ordinance change. So that is our hope in that. And with support of maybe even just this portion of the proposed draft, we would bring forth draft policies that spells out how we would go about recruitment, hiring, selection, transfers, promotions, separations, and things of that nature. That will absolutely still come to this committee for approval.
I agree that hiring and termination does not necessarily need to be an ordinance, because HR world changes. So
Mhm.
having something a little bit more easy to adjust does make sense.
Great, thank you. The other aspect that we would completely remove from the ordinance language relates to nepotism. We would also create a policy around that, that this board would, or this committee would review and approve as well. Okay, so we covered that. I got ahead of myself a little bit on my slides. All right, if we are ready, I'll move to, well, kind of back a page on page 6 to the compensation plan. So this draft removes the specific language around the 11 steps, and instead, in a nutshell, just provides that the county manager would make a recommendation around what that compensation plan looks like. Typically, that's going to happen through the budget process. That would come to the Committee on Administration still, and the board would still approve that. So really, we are just looking for less specifics here to allow more flexibility in what the county manager can propose each year. Also within this plan is the equity compensation adjustments. So we would keep language in here about that. And then I would also bring forth a policy around like how that would happen and the factors that are considered in doing that. So it's a little bit more generic here in this proposed ordinance draft, and we would give the specifics in a policy on that. But the process of the county manager approving those is how that occurs now.
And I would just add, and we're kind of doing that this year, but if you're familiar, typically the compensation plan or it would typically come with the benefits plan in like the September Committee on Administration meeting. Though that will probably still happen in its official form as it goes to the board, we would probably be looking at a May, April type time where we would be making a recommendation to the committee, just to the Committee on Administration, and that's what we would use for kind of our round 1 budget and that communication to staff. So obviously, like with the time frame that we're on here, this is some of the work that we were doing ahead of time because we do build that first budget based on a recommendation. So we would be looking at that time prior to budgets being sent out to departments to gather your blessing in the initial proposal. But the final one has to be approved by the board because it's compensation.
This change would be fundamental in us moving forward with the wage proposal for 2026. So we can't do that without this, I guess, and vice versa.
Yep. And I guess just procedurally around how that works. So obviously this is on your agenda as a discussion item this week to get the feedback that we're getting. The intent would be in July. At the July committee meeting, we would bring that as an action item to go to the full board in July and then in September. So because it's an ordinance, 2 readings. So I just want to kind of stress we don't want to force your hand to do anything, but if we are to go forward with this pay plan, those approvals have to happen kind of in that time frame in order to hit our November budget timeline. So
As you make those changes, if there are any changes, would you just send those via email for us to look at as we're kind of studying things between now and July? Is that a possibility?
Is that okay to do? Because I would be happy to.
we can send them information. Yeah, they just
Okay.
can't talk amongst themselves.
Oh,
And I mean, I welcome meetings with you individually if you'd like to come and give some more thoughts and comments and look at it together. And between now and July, absolutely happy to do that.
okay, thank you.
Just, it's not part of the policy. It's always a question that's bothered me. Is that when we get oftentimes a compensation adjustment. And I know that I like the way it's done. But so many times it comes back and says the department's able to absorb it. And the only issue I have with that is I have been questioned a few times from people that say, well, are all their budgets padded that much that this can take place and, $8,000 a year raise can take place? And, not that I want it the other way. I know we should report it that way. I have a little,
So and Jenna and I actually talked about that a little bit yesterday of how do we manage that? So, I would say no, there isn't padding.
Yeah.
But
Turnover.
what you run into is vacancies, right? So if somebody leaves for a little while, we save that money that was budgeted for them. So there's technically not a need for a budget amendment in order to provide more funding to be able to do that. However, potentially in the next budget cycle, that increase is recognized, right? So it's maybe hiding it in a little way, I would argue unintentionally, but and so I think maybe we can come up with a way as we present those types of changes to make it clear to you that that's going to be the
I
impact.
think one of the last ones, we had a similar conversation that was there. You did put due to, in other words, why do we have the money? And the money was due to just what you were saying.
Mhm.
And then that makes it a little more palatable. I don't know. I mean, especially when we're, something we're voting on, saying, oh yeah, this is fine. I don't think people, if they see the reason, it's a kind of a very well accepted, I think, but.
Yep.
Well,
That's-
and I think that's particularly important at this moment in time when we have a largely very new board. So those of us who've been here forever know that answer, but it's really important to convey that answer, particularly to more members of the
Yeah,
public.
and the other thing is with current federal things being done, that people just, everybody's going, well, sure, no wonder you guys got, you padded the budget, so. I know we don't, we have very tight budgets. And, and you only have to be here and go through a budget cycle a couple of times to know that, but thank you. I just, when that comes up, but yeah, I like that to be included in what. Thank you. All right, Jenna, go ahead. Yes.
So just to summarize, what we had talked about today, looking to move from that complex approval process of creating a job title to more, tracking and transparency of the staffing level, which like carries that fiscal weight. And also changing the compensation plan to be less specific so that the county manager can continue to recommend each year to the Committee on Administration and then the board. And then also just to maintain authority of committee and board approval on things that have a fiscal impact. So we wanting to be really diligent about that. And again, I had mentioned with this proposed draft would be the intention to create at least these types of policies. So we are not looking to remove any sort of limiting or policy language on those, but have the ability to propose it to you, and then it's an easier process to update them and keep them adapting with the times. So those are listed there, and I would intend to have them along with the July version of this proposal. It's going to be a big agenda. And then key takeaways, we kind of covered that. So potential next steps today, we're reviewing and discussing, and between today and the July Committee on Administration meeting, I welcome more discussion and recommendations. Would be looking to bring hopefully a pretty solid draft to this committee at the July meeting. And then because the board meeting is after Committee on Administration in July, we would hope to provide them with their first review of that. And then we don't have a normal meeting in August, so it would be September for the second reading. And I really appreciate your time.
Any other questions before? Sheila,
Do we need to maybe adjust our meeting time to accommodate this?
I had that same thought. You robbed my mind here. Yeah. Any ideas in the committee? Michelle?
Well, because the Health and Human Services is usually at 6, so it would give us 3 hours. So will 3 hours be enough in July? Or I hope so.
I do too. I think it'll depend on maybe how aligned each of you are in your and changes that you're wanting to see. If I hear feedback from you between now and then, and I'm able to implement those and try and communicate each draft along the way.
Yeah, I would encourage you to, if you have the opportunity, meet with Jenna or myself and make sure that we have something that written, that we have that understanding ahead of time will always help with that. So.
All right, we go to 3 o'clock then?
During the fair.
Mm.
So I guess I was kind of wondering, since I know the neighbors has already moved theirs up to the 17th, if we could consider a week earlier.
Did you have time to do it?
I will make whatever happen as much as possible, but we are still having those department meetings until like mid-July, and also vetting these policy drafts through HR, other folks on the HR team, and I don't know that I'll have them all ready by that point.
The 22nd.
Just a few days or yeah, that
That worked.
22nd? Yeah. Okay. Sheila?
Yeah.
All right, Michelle, you feel you can? All right, I can. 3 o'clock on the 22nd then.
I didn't know if we needed, and maybe it's still sinking in, as far as the wage proposal specifically, if there is a shift percentage wise or otherwise that we should consider between now and July.
Hmm.
And we can also talk about that.
Well,
outside.
yeah,
Unless,
Michelle.
I'd like to just sit down and talk someday.
Absolutely.
yeah. I would just ask that, as you're doing that, remember that this is our part of the budget plan.
Mhm.
I guess I'm just gonna put it that way and let it go. Right. Okay, that takes care of, code and wage proposal. Consideration reports, resolutions and ordinances that we would plan to take forward to the, board. A resolution, 2025 budget amendment for CJCC. Believe that is $2,000. Motion. Okay,
No second.
motion seconded, Story and Bauer. Any questions? Any speaking that needs to be done?
I would just tell you the last second Sarah had to leave for the day, so she's not here to answer.
Yeah,
But she did call me and tell me it's just the
but-
typical. This is a donation that's being passed
Okay.
along. So
Congratulations to Sarah. She's always, I don't know where she finds it all, but she does. All right, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, move forward. And then a resolution amending the job classification. Again, we talked about that one. A combination of basically two jobs. Jenna, if you'd read that to us again.
Absolutely. So we did talk about this earlier, but this job title would be created to combine what is currently the Facilities and Parks Director and the Transit Commission Manager to one role. And we do have a candidate that is
it's been announced.
performing that as of now, Austin Witt, who's currently the Transit Commission Manager. And this recommendation, I is in the interest of fiscal responsibility and as well as operational efficiency. So
So related to your conversation earlier, right?
Okay.
So obviously, Highway Austin is currently the transit director, which is its own fund. So it does not receive any levy funding. So in the change, what we'd be doing is we're looking at shifting half of Austin's. Well, first of all, with this title, there is an increase in pay, right? But we would be splitting his role 50-50 between the two different areas. So that frees up half of his salary on the transit side, and he's going to be backfilling by increasing the a part-time operations manager to full-time there. So it will certainly not be an increase. We expect it to be a little bit probably of a savings in doing that, and that the other half of the operations manager will be less than the other half of Austin, right? Facility side, very similar as you look at Scott's former salary, kind of taking up a little bit of Austin, but he's only 50% there. So with that remaining costs, we'll be looking to increase some of the staffing to provide another layer of operations type management in the facility side to backfill that in. Though those changes haven't been done yet, in order to truly figure that out, I've kind of given Austin the power to figure out how he wants to structure the facilities department underneath him, giving him the guidance that there will not be an increase in the overall funding of those things. So we'll be likely looking to promote or to create another permission, to elevate an existing position. So you should expect to see another job classification change in the facilities side, in that same way to be able to do that. But it will, in the end, all of these changes, we expect to have a savings to the county kind of on both ends. So, and we believe will be more efficient.
Any other explanation?
I'm just wanting to be sure that this isn't putting too much on him.
So, yeah, I can talk about it. I had to decide how.
Or I can.
Yeah. So part of this had actually come as a discussion that I had with Austin, and that he was really looking to grow, and he felt like he had more capacity even in his existing role to be able to expand on that. Not to mention we are backfilling, right? So he currently had like 11 employees at transit, and there's like 13, I think it is, at highway. And so he's going to be going to 3 to 4.
You said
direct
highway, you
employees.
meant facilities.
I did say, yes. So yeah, highway's got a few more. So I think his direct management of people is going to go down quite considerably, and we're really looking at him to do some of that really high level thinking and planning around the operation. So he was excited about the opportunity and feels like he can fit it all in. Now, this week, he might feel a little bit otherwise as he's learning, drinking from the fire hose as it is. But no, I think in the end, I think we'll be in a really good place to be able to do that and really fully utilize Austin's capabilities that he was being held back. Austin spent a considerable amount of time driving buses while he was in transit. And so we'll be shifting that and really fully utilizing him and backfilling him with someone that's paid to drive buses.
But I'll add a tiny bit to that, having been transit committee chair. So one of the things that I was really excited about when Austin took the transit role is he did exactly what Dan has done. He's like, where are problems? What can I find? And he went through and systematically did all sorts of amazing things for transit in the sort of strategic space. And when I left my role as on the transit committee, he was very clearly like, I'm starting to run out of problems to solve. And so we're very much in a case where you need to give him problems to solve if you want to keep him, and we desperately want to keep him.
And we found him some more problems. So
right.
yes.
At the point, someone make a motion to approve. All right. All right, so Ann and Michelle, all in favor, aye? Aye. Any opposed? Passes. Thank you very much. Good luck to Austin. I think he'll do a really good job. So our next meeting date on our agenda says the 24th. We have decided it will be July 22nd at 3 o'clock. Second. And figure out which, and you'll.
No, because that's my meeting, but I lead that group, so no, it won't happen.
So 60, you think? Okay, room 60 on the 22nd.
So I have updates to those 3 questions on the vouchers, if you're ready for that.
No. All right, go ahead. Please.
So the veterans, he bought about 3,600 flags that were the 8 by or 6 by 12. And then what he separated in the other expense was the shipping cost. So that is, he wanted to keep them separate. The other question was about the leases. The reason one is about like $35 more is because March was paid late and there were finance charges for that. The last question was about the invoice in emergency, was it environmental services or?
Yeah.
So I'll echo what Dan said, because looking at the invoice, I really can't tell. All it says is acres and how many acres, and it's by years, and here's your dollar amount. And looking at a face, what I'm saying, trying to say is I can't really give you more information other than, you know, it's.
I think, I'll add to that. I think that with the presentation that we had, he showed some of the larger expenses that he had and explained that this money is applied for, and it went back to, I believe, 2002 changes in the law. And if you're prior to 2002 and changes were needed to be made, you could apply for grant money.
Yep,
And then the
and it-
grant money comes in, the grant money goes out.
So it's, he has it called here nutrient management.
Yep,
Okay, does that, okay, then.
yeah, makes
all right.
sense. Yep. Thank you.
Mhm.
Appreciate it. All right, with that, we're adjourned. Thank you all. And
Great job, Jen.
you are studying for next time. Study for next time around. Thank you, Donna.
Good job.
Good job. Very good.
Good work to do.
Yeah, they start playing.
Over here.
Oh,
Oh, there.
Oh, because we're, oh, we're ahead. Week ahead. Is that why? I don't know.
They did. County shirt. What? That's all I'm getting at. That's a great. I'm getting that. I'll get it.